Have you ever wondered how it would feel to be forced to follow a specific religion or religious doctrine? Such was the case in 16th century England. At different times, people were expected to abandon their faith and follow whatever religion their rulers dictated. For many years, much of Europe and England was led by the papacy and the Catholic Church. It wasn't until 1517, when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Thesis on the door of a Catholic church in Germany, that the Protestant movement began to grow. Then, in the early 1530s, King Henry VIII renounced the Catholic Church after the Pope refused to grant him a divorce. He declared himself supreme head of the Church in England. Upon Henry's death, his son Edward, who was raised Protestant, inherited the throne, but he died soon after and the crown was passed to Edward's half-sister, Mary. Queen Mary was a devout Catholic, like her mother, and during her short reign, from 1553 to 1558, she repealed her father's religious reforms and re-established Catholicism as the official religion of England, Wales, and Ireland. She also ordered the imprisonment and merciless burning of hundreds of Protestants who she considered heretics. Upon Mary's death at the age of 42, her half-sister Elizabeth inherited the throne, and she established the English Protestant Church, which later evolved into the Church of England, the Anglican Church. But she decided it would be in her best interest to be more tolerant of English Catholics. What she would not tolerate, however, were nonconformists, those who believed the Anglican Church's practices were essentially Catholic traditions and rituals. Queen Elizabeth instituted laws that fined or imprisoned nonconformists. For conformists, it wasn't a problem. They just went along with whatever made life easier, but for nonconformists, it was not a good time to be living in England. Elizabeth's successor, King James I, who acquired the throne in 1603, also sought to conform the nonconformists by force. The Puritans feared God more than they feared the king, though. One such group was called the Scrooby congregation, a brave group of English separatists and nonconformists. They regularly gathered in secret to worship and study the Bible at the manor house of William and Mary Brewster in Scrooby. William Bradford was a member of the congregation, although just a young man at the time. He would later become governor of the Plymouth colony. Facing persecution, imprisonment, and confiscation of their property, the Scrooby congregation eventually had no choice but to flee to Holland, where religious tolerance would permit them to worship freely. The story of their escape is well documented. They sent the women and children first, but the men's escape was a bit more perilous. Leaving the country without permission from the king was forbidden. They had to find sailors willing to smuggle them out of the country for a hefty price. Brewster organized their escape, but their first attempt ended with them being arrested after the crew reported them and confiscated their belongings. They eventually secured a deal with the owner of another ship, though, and they were soon on their way to Holland. The ship's crewmen mocked them for needing their help, asking, "Where is your God?" Then, a ferocious storm swept in and began battering the ship. The God-fearing men humbly prayed and begged God to spare them and deliver them safely to their awaiting families. Suddenly the storm ceased, and they thanked God for hearing their prayer. The crewmen had witnessed a soul-stirring miracle. Finally, in 1608, they reached Amsterdam and later settled in Leiden, where they were permitted to establish a church, with John Robinson as pastor and William Brewster as his assistant. About the year 1618, King James ordered a manhunt for Brewster after he published several books expressing his discontent with the Church of England. Eventually, Robinson and Brewster began to plan the congregation's removal to America. John Carver and Robert Cushman were sent to negotiate with the officials in London, and Brewster remained in hiding until it was time for the ship Speedwell to sail. The plan was to sail to Plymouth, England, where the Speedwell would be joined by the Mayflower, and the two ships would sail together to America. Soon after the start of their voyage, the Speedwell was deemed unsafe for sailing, and the two returned to England. Some people decided to stay, but the rest packed into the Mayflower for the 66-day journey across the Atlantic. They arrived in November of 1620 and began to build a nation from scratch. They had a vision of a land whose people were blessed by the God who had led them here. Were any of your ancestors on the Mayflower? Tell us in the comments. Thank you for watching, and please give the like button a tap and subscribe to learn more about America's ancestors.